Don't touch that. Ethan Caldwell's eyes locked onto the small object in Maya Brooks's hand, and for the first time that evening, the man everyone in Chicago knew as untouchable looked genuinely shaken. The room around him was silent, but silence was nothing new to Ethan. He had been born deaf. He had never heard his mother's voice, never heard rain against a window, never heard music, laughter, or his own name spoken aloud. Yet somehow, he understood exactly what Maya had pulled from the pocket of her plain black uniform. The new maid stood beneath the warm chandelier light, her dark hands perfectly still, her expression calm despite the sudden attention of 4 members of Ethan's household staff. She had been working at the Caldwell estate for only 3 days. 3 days of polishing mahogany tables, arranging fresh flowers, and moving quietly through rooms where millions of dollars changed hands without a word being spoken. She was supposed to be invisible. That was how Ethan preferred his employees. Quiet, predictable, easy to replace. But Maya had just broken the one rule nobody had ever dared to challenge. Never surprise Ethan Caldwell. He rose slowly from his chair. 6 feet 3 inches of controlled authority, dressed in a charcoal suit, his dark hair neatly swept back, his expression usually as unreadable as stone. Ethan could not hear the whispered questions behind him, but he could see a security chief glance toward the door. Maya noticed it too. She simply shook her head. "No," she said softly. Ethan watched her lips form the word. Then she turned the object over in her palm. It was an old silver recording device, no larger than a deck of cards, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He had never seen it before. At least, that was what he believed. Then Maya pointed to the faded initials engraved along its side. Ethan stopped moving. His mother had used those initials when she wrote letters for him as a child. She had been gone for 18 years. He stepped closer, studying the device as though the answer to his entire life might be hidden beneath its scratched surface. Maya reached into her pocket again and removed a small handwritten note. Ethan took it from her. His eyes moved across the first line, then the second. His expression changed. The powerful man who could silence a room with a single glance suddenly looked like someone standing at the edge of a memory he had never been allowed to enter. Maya watched him carefully. She had not come to the Caldwell estate for the money. She had not come because she admired his reputation. And she certainly had not come by accident. Ethan looked up at her. His fingers tightened around the note. "Where?" he mouthed slowly. "Did you get this?" Maya held his gaze. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then she pointed toward the locked study at the end of the hall. Ethan followed her eyes. He had kept that room closed for nearly 2 decades. He had never told anyone why. But now his new maid seemed to know exactly what was waiting behind its door. And Ethan Caldwell suddenly realized that the woman he had barely noticed for 3 days might know something about his past that even he had never been told. 3 days earlier, Maya Brooks had arrived at the Caldwell estate carrying one suitcase, a worn leather purse, and a quiet determination to keep her head down. The mansion stood behind tall iron gates on a private stretch of Chicago, its pale stone walls glowing beneath carefully placed lights, its windows reflecting the evening sky like sheets of dark glass. Maya had seen wealthy homes before, but nothing like this. Every surface seemed designed to remind visitors that money lived here. Polished marble floors, walnut doors, crystal light fixtures, furniture that looked as though nobody had ever been allowed to sit on it. At the center of it all was Ethan Caldwell, a man whose name appeared in newspapers whenever Chicago business circles whispered about power. Maya knew better than to believe everything she heard. She also knew enough to understand that people did not casually walk into Ethan's world. On her first morning, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, had given her a short list of rules. Keep the rooms immaculate. Never discuss the Caldwell family's private affairs. Never enter Ethan's study unless specifically instructed. And above everything else, remember that Mr. Caldwell communicated through writing, gestures, and American Sign Language. Maya had nodded. She understood. What Mrs. Carter did not know was that Maya already knew American Sign Language. She had learned it years earlier while helping a neighbor's child communicate, and over time, she had become comfortable enough to hold entire conversations without speaking. She never mentioned it during her interview. There had been no reason to. Maya needed the job, and she had learned that drawing attention to herself rarely made life easier. So she became exactly what everyone expected a new maid to be. Quiet, efficient, invisible. Each morning at 6:30, she entered through the staff entrance, tied her dark hair back, and began working through the mansion room by room. Ethan rarely crossed her path. When he did, he moved with the confidence of someone who never needed to announce his presence. His assistant usually carried a tablet and typed whatever Ethan needed to know. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Instructions appeared on screens. Conversations flowed around him while he watched every face with remarkable attention. Maya noticed something others seemed to miss. Ethan was not disconnected from the world. He was studying it constantly. He watched hands, eyes, expressions, and movement. Nothing escaped him. On her second day, Maya was polishing a long walnut table when Ethan entered the dining room unexpectedly. She stepped aside immediately. Ethan stopped. His eyes moved toward the cloth in her hand, then to the table, and finally to her face. He raised one hand and signed a simple question. "Who are you?" Maya hesitated for half a second before answering in sign language. "Maya Brooks, new housekeeper." Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. He had expected her to speak. Instead, she had answered him in his own language. He studied her hands, then her face. "Where did you learn that?" Maya signed, "My grandmother taught me." It was not entirely true, but it was close enough to the truth to protect the part of her past she was not ready to reveal. Ethan gave a small nod and walked away. Maya watched him disappear through the doorway. She thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong, because later that afternoon, while cleaning the hallway outside Ethan's private study, Maya noticed something unusual beneath the door. A thin strip of old paper had slipped into the hallway. She picked it up only because she was afraid someone might step on it. There were 3 handwritten words on the paper. She recognized the handwriting immediately. And for the first time since arriving at the Caldwell estate, Maya understood that Ethan's silence was not the only secret inside that house. The 3 handwritten words were still in Maya's mind when she finished her shift that evening. She had seen the handwriting only once before, years ago, on a letter her grandmother had kept inside an old wooden box. It belonged to Elena Caldwell, Ethan's mother. Maya knew that because Elena had written the same distinctive capital E, the same narrow letters, and the same slight curve beneath every signature. The paper in Maya's hand was old, yellowed around the edges, but the ink remained remarkably clear. It read, "Ethan deserves to know." Maya stood alone in the hallway, staring at those 4 words as the mansion settled into its usual evening quiet. She should have returned the paper immediately. Instead, she looked toward the closed study door. For 18 years, that door had remained private. Nobody entered without permission. Nobody even cleaned the room unless Ethan specifically requested it. Yet somehow, a message written by his mother had found its way into the hallway. Maya carefully placed the paper back where she had found it and continued down the corridor. She told herself she had done the right thing. But the next morning, she noticed something strange. Ethan was standing outside his study before 7 o'clock, holding a tablet in one hand. He looked directly at her. Then he signed, "Did you find something yesterday?" Maya's heart skipped. She kept her expression calm. "No, sir." Ethan studied her face for several seconds. His ability to read people had made him exceptionally difficult to deceive. He did not need to hear hesitation in someone's voice. He could see it in their eyes. He signed again. "Are you sure?" Maya nodded. Ethan looked toward the study door, then back at her. Finally, he walked away. Maya waited until he disappeared around the corner before releasing the breath she had been holding. She thought the moment had passed. It had not. That afternoon, while dusting the library shelves, Maya heard the faint vibration of a phone on a nearby table. Ethan's assistant had left it there. A message appeared on the screen. Someone had accessed the old family archive. Maya froze. The message contained only one sentence. The Caldwell records are no longer secure. Before she could look again, the screen went dark. She stepped away from the table. Her hands felt cold. The old paper, the study, Elena Caldwell's handwriting, the archive. None of it seemed accidental anymore. Then she noticed Ethan standing at the library entrance. He had seen her reaction. He did not look angry. He looked concerned. He slowly raised his hands and signed. "What did you see?" Maya hesitated. She had promised herself she would not become involved in the Caldwell family secrets. But she also knew that whatever had been hidden from Ethan for 18 years was beginning to surface. She looked directly at him and signed, "Your mother." Ethan went completely still. His eyes dropped to her hands. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "What do you know about her?" Maya lowered her hands. She knew the answer could change Ethan's understanding of his entire childhood. But before she could respond, a soft notification appeared on Ethan's tablet. He looked down. His expression shifted immediately. A photograph had arrived. It showed the same silver recording device Maya had carried into the mansion that morning. Beneath the photograph was one sentence. "If she has that device, she already knows the truth." Ethan looked up at Maya. For the first time, neither of them pretended this was a coincidence. For several seconds, Ethan did not move. The photograph remained on his tablet, the silver recording device unmistakable beneath the cold, white light of the library. Maya could see the question forming in his expression. Before he signed it, "Why do you have this?" Maya looked toward the hallway, then back at him. She knew there was no safe way to avoid the answer anymore. She reached into her purse and carefully removed the same device. Ethan stared at it. His fingers moved slowly. "Where did you get it?" Maya placed the device on the library table between them. "My grandmother gave it to me," she signed. "She told me never to show it to anyone unless I met you." Ethan's expression tightened. "Your grandmother knew my mother?" Maya nodded. "Her name was Ruth Brooks. She worked for your family many years ago." Ethan looked toward the old bookshelves as if searching his memory. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who knew pieces of his childhood, yet almost nobody had ever spoken openly about his mother. Elena Caldwell had died when Ethan was 17. The official family story had always been simple. She had been ill. She had wanted privacy. She had left behind a few photographs and personal belongings, but nothing that explained why she had spent the final months of her life searching through old records. Maya watched Ethan carefully. She could see the disbelief behind his calm expression. Then she signed something that made him stop. "Your mother believed someone had hidden the truth from you." Ethan's hands lowered. He looked at the recording device again.
"Why?"
Maya shook her head. "I do not know everything, but my grandmother knew enough to be afraid of getting involved." Ethan's eyes sharpened at the word afraid. He reached for the device, turning it slowly in his hand. There was a small compartment on the back that he had never noticed before. Maya pointed to it. "Your mother designed it that way." Ethan opened the compartment. Inside was a tiny folded piece of paper. His hands became completely still. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. "If Ethan ever finds this, tell him I never stopped looking for an answer." Ethan read the sentence twice, then a third time. For the first time since Maya had met him, his carefully controlled expression gave way to something deeper. Not anger, not fear, grief mixed with wonder. He touched the paper with his thumb. Maya waited. Then Ethan signed. "Why would she leave this with your family?" Maya looked down at the device. "Because she trusted my grandmother more than she trusted the people around her." Ethan studied her face. He seemed to be searching for a reason not to believe her, but every answer only created another question. Then his tablet vibrated again. A new message appeared from his assistant. The family archive had been accessed a second time. This time, the message included a location. The old study. Ethan looked toward the closed door at the end of the hall. Maya followed his gaze. Neither of them spoke. Ethan picked up the recording device and walked toward the study. After 18 years, he was finally going to open the room he had kept closed since his mother's death. Maya followed a few steps behind. At the door, Ethan stopped. His hand rested on the handle. He looked at Maya and signed one final question. Are you sure you want to know what is inside? Maya met his eyes and nodded. Ethan opened the door. The room beyond was covered in dust, but one thing immediately caught their attention. On the desk sat a fresh, white envelope. It had been placed there recently, and written across the front, in Elena Caldwell's unmistakable handwriting, were two words that made Ethan's entire world feel suddenly unfamiliar. For Ethan. The envelope sat beneath the soft glow of the desk lamp, untouched for 18 years, and yet somehow perfectly preserved. Ethan stood on one side of the desk while Maya remained near the doorway, giving him space. He stared at his name written across the paper. His mother had always written his name that way, with a slight curve beneath the final letter. There was no mistaking it. Ethan carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper and a small photograph. He picked up the photograph first. It showed Elena Caldwell standing beside a younger Ruth Brooks outside a hospital in downtown Chicago. Between them stood a small boy with dark hair and a serious expression. Ethan. He had been 7 years old. Maya recognized the picture immediately. Her grandmother had kept a copy in the same wooden box where she stored family letters. Ethan turned it over. On the back, Elena had written a date. March 14th, 1999. Then came a sentence that made Maya's breath catch. The first test worked. Ethan looked at her. What test? Maya slowly shook her head. I do not know. He unfolded the letter. The first lines were addressed directly to him. My dear Ethan, if you are reading this, then something happened that I prayed would never happen. You grew up believing that silence was the only world you would ever know. That was never supposed to be your future. Ethan stopped. His eyes remained fixed on the page. Maya could see his fingers trembling slightly. He continued reading. Elena explained that when Ethan was 7, she had discovered a research program that studied advanced sound stimulation for children born deaf. The early results had been promising. Ethan had responded to certain vibrations and carefully calibrated signals. For the first time, doctors believed he might eventually experience aspects of sound through specialized technology. But the program had suddenly ended. The funding disappeared. The records were sealed. Elena had spent years trying to understand why. Then she discovered that someone within the Caldwell family had pressured the program to stop working with Ethan. Ethan lowered the letter. He looked toward Maya, disbelief written across his face. Why would anyone do that? Maya had no answer. She only knew what her grandmother had told her. Your mother believed the truth was hidden because someone wanted you dependent on the people around you. Ethan looked back at the letter. The next sentence was shorter. Ruth knows where I kept the original research. Maya's eyes widened. Her grandmother had never mentioned research papers. Ethan noticed her reaction. You knew? Maya shook her head quickly. I knew there was something important. I did not know what it was. Ethan turned the page. At the bottom, Elena had written an address. It was not in Chicago. It was a small rehabilitation center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, nearly 90 miles away. Beneath the address was one final sentence. If I cannot take Ethan there myself, please make sure someone does. The room became completely still. Ethan folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the silver recording device. For 18 years, he had believed his mother had accepted his deafness as something that could never change. Now he understood that she had spent years searching for another possibility. Maya stepped closer. Ethan looked at her and signed slowly. Why did your grandmother never tell me? Maya lowered her eyes. Because she was afraid you would never believe her. Ethan looked toward the photograph again. Then he noticed something neither of them had seen before. A second photograph was hidden behind the first. It showed Elena standing beside a woman Maya had never seen. Underneath the photograph was a handwritten name, Dr. Rebecca Morgan. And beneath that name were 4 words that changed the meaning of everything they had just discovered. She still has it. The name beneath the photograph stayed between them like an unfinished sentence. Dr. Rebecca Morgan. Ethan picked up the picture again, studying the woman's face beneath the faded colors. She looked to be in her early 40s, standing beside Elena with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly why she was there. Ethan turned the photograph over, searching for another clue. Nothing. Just an address and a date written in his mother's handwriting. She still has it. He looked at Maya. What does she have? Maya read his lips and shook her head. I do not know. Ethan looked unconvinced, but he did not press her. Instead, he opened his tablet and typed the address into a map. The rehabilitation center was still operating, although under a different name. It was nearly 90 miles from Chicago, a little over an hour and a half by car depending on traffic. Ethan stared at the screen for several seconds. Then he signed, "We are going." Maya hesitated. Tonight? Ethan nodded. Tonight. There was something different in his expression now. The cold certainty he carried through every room had been replaced by something much more personal. Hope, perhaps, or fear of finding out that hope had been misplaced. Less than an hour later, they were traveling north through the evening traffic. Ethan sat in the back of a dark sedan, the silver recording device resting in his palm. Maya sat across from him, holding Elena's letter inside a protective folder. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Every few minutes, Ethan looked down at the old photograph. When they finally reached the rehabilitation center, snow had begun to fall lightly across the parking lot. The building looked nothing like the grand Caldwell estate. It was a modest brick facility with warm yellow lights behind its windows. Ethan stepped inside first. A receptionist looked up and immediately recognized him. Her expression changed. "Mr. Caldwell?" Ethan nodded. The woman glanced toward Maya, then back at him. "Dr. Morgan is still here." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "She is?" The receptionist nodded slowly. "She has been expecting someone for a very long time." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. They were led down a quiet hallway to a small office. Before they reached the door, an elderly woman stepped out. Her hair was silver, her posture straight, and her eyes immediately fixed on Ethan. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Then she looked at the photograph in his hand. Her expression softened. She signed slowly. "You look just like your mother." Ethan froze. He had not expected her to know sign language. He answered, "You knew Elena?" Dr. Morgan nodded. "I knew her very well." Maya watched as the doctor's eyes moved toward the silver device Ethan was holding. She took a slow breath. "She told me you would come one day." Ethan's fingers tightened around the device. "What did she leave?" Dr. Morgan looked at Maya, then back at Ethan. "Not what you think." She walked to a locked cabinet and removed a small wooden case. She placed it gently on the desk. Ethan stared at it. Dr. Morgan opened the lid. Inside was a compact electronic device, carefully preserved, along with several handwritten pages. "Your mother did not leave this because she believed it would cure you," Dr. Morgan signed. "She left it because she wanted you to have a choice." Ethan looked down at the device. For 18 years, everyone had told him that silence was simply the life he had been given. Now, a woman who had known his mother was telling him something completely different. She pointed to the equipment. This was the first prototype. Ethan stared at it, unable to look away. Then Dr. Morgan added one final detail. "And there is something else your mother asked me never to tell anyone until you were ready." Dr. Rebecca Morgan's final sentence settled over the room. Ethan stared at her, his hands motionless above the small wooden case. For 18 years, he had believed the most important decisions about his life had already been made for him. Now, he was learning that his mother had deliberately left a choice waiting for him. He signed slowly. "What did she ask you to keep secret?" Dr. Morgan looked toward Maya. "She wanted me to wait until you were old enough to make the decision without anyone deciding for you." Ethan's eyes narrowed with concentration. "What decision?" Dr. Morgan opened the wooden case completely. Beneath the prototype was a thin stack of handwritten notes, each page carefully dated. She placed the first page in front of him. Elena had written about Ethan as a child, describing how he responded to vibrations, patterns, and changes in pressure. She wrote about the first time he reacted to a carefully calibrated signal. It had not been dramatic. It had been a tiny movement, almost impossible to notice. But Elena had noticed. She had spent months documenting every response. Dr. Morgan explained that the prototype had never been designed as a cure. It was created to give Ethan another way to experience information through controlled sensory signals. The technology was experimental, and Elena had refused to make promises she could not keep. She only wanted Ethan to have an opportunity that nobody could take away from him. Ethan read every page in silence. Then he reached for the device. Maya watched him carefully as Dr. Morgan adjusted the settings. "This may feel strange at first," she signed. Ethan nodded. Dr. Morgan placed the device gently against his hand and activated it. Nothing happened that could be seen from across the room. Ethan looked down. His expression remained uncertain. Then his fingers moved slightly. He looked at Maya. She understood immediately.
He could feel something.
Dr. Morgan adjusted the setting by a small amount. Ethan closed his eyes. A faint vibration moved through his hand and wrist. It was not sound. It was not a voice. It was simply a new sensation, subtle but unmistakable. Ethan opened his eyes. For a man who had spent his entire life mastering silence, that tiny sensation seemed enormous. Maya stepped closer, but she did not touch him. She simply waited. Ethan looked at the device and then at Dr. Morgan. "My mother knew this could work," he signed. Dr. Morgan nodded. "She believed you deserved the chance to decide for yourself." Ethan lowered his gaze. His mother had not promised him a miracle. She had given him something more realistic and, perhaps, more meaningful. A choice. Then Dr. Morgan reached for another envelope. "There is one more thing." Ethan looked up. She handed it to him. The envelope contained a single photograph of Elena, Ruth Brooks, and Dr. Morgan standing beside the original equipment. On the back, Elena had written a message addressed to Ethan. "Never let anyone convince you that the world is smaller because you experience it differently." Ethan read the sentence twice. Then he looked at Maya. For the first time since they had met, he smiled without hesitation. But Maya noticed something else in the photograph. In the background stood a man she recognized. He had been in the Caldwell Estate's security files. Ethan followed her gaze. His smile disappeared. Dr. Morgan noticed the change in both their faces. "You recognize him?" she asked. Maya nodded slowly. "He still works for the Caldwell family." The room went completely still. Ethan looked down at the photograph again. The mystery was no longer only about what his mother had hidden. Someone had known about the prototype all along, and that person was still close to him. The photograph remained on the desk between Ethan, Maya, and Dr. Morgan. For several seconds, nobody moved. Ethan pointed to the man in the background and signed. "Who is he?" Maya leaned closer. The face was unmistakable. His name was Daniel Price, and he had worked for the Caldwell family for more than 20 years. He was not part of Ethan's closest circle, but he appeared in security records, household photographs, and old family documents with surprising regularity. Dr. Morgan looked troubled. "Daniel was one of the people who knew about the prototype," she signed. "Your mother trusted him once." Ethan's expression became unreadable. "Once." Dr. Morgan nodded. After the research program ended, Elena became convinced that someone was interfering with her efforts to continue it. She stopped discussing the project with almost everyone. Ruth was one of the few people she still trusted. Maya looked at the photograph again. "My grandmother told me Elena became frightened near the end," she said. "But she never told me why." Ethan lowered his eyes to the silver recording device. He had spent years believing that his mother had simply accepted his condition and moved on with her life. Now, every new discovery suggested something different. Elena had been searching for answers. She had been protecting information. And she had left instructions for people she trusted to wait until Ethan was ready. Ethan turned to Maya. "Why did your grandmother choose you?" Maya took a slow breath. "Because she believed I would recognize the device." Ethan looked confused. Maya explained that Ruth had spent years preserving old documents from Elena. After Ruth passed away, Maya found the wooden box among her belongings. She did not understand its significance until she saw the same symbol engraved on the silver device during her interview at the Caldwell estate. She had accepted the maid position because she needed access to one answer. She had never expected to find Ethan standing at the center of it. Dr. Morgan listened carefully. Then she opened another drawer and removed a thin folder. Your mother left one final instruction, she signed. She wanted the original research returned to Ethan, but only after he knew why it had been hidden. Ethan opened the folder. Inside were several pages describing the prototype, its limitations, and the progress Ethan had made as a child. Nothing promised a cure. Nothing suggested that his deafness was something that needed to define his worth. Instead, Elena had written about independence, communication, and choice. Ethan read the final page. Then he looked up. She wanted me to choose, he signed. Dr. Morgan nodded. Exactly. Ethan closed the folder. For the first time, the mystery felt less like a secret being uncovered and more like a life being returned to its rightful owner. Then Maya noticed a small notation in the corner of one page.
A date.
Tomorrow's date. Ethan saw it too. Beneath it was a location in Chicago. The Caldwell estate. Maya looked at Ethan. Someone knew we would come here. Ethan nodded slowly. He picked up the silver device and placed it carefully inside the wooden case. Then he looked toward the window, where snow continued falling across the dark parking lot. He had come to Milwaukee expecting answers about his mother. Instead, he had found a question waiting for him back home. Who had been protecting the secret, and who had been watching for the moment he finally discovered it? Ethan stood. Maya stood beside him. Dr. Morgan handed him Elena's letter. Your mother always believed the truth would find you, she signed. Ethan looked at Maya. His expression softened. Then he signed 4 words that she understood immediately. We go home together. The drive back to Chicago was quiet, but Ethan was no longer the same man who had left the Caldwell estate that evening. The wooden case rested beside him, Elena's letter safely inside, while Maya sat across from him with the old photograph in her hands. Neither needed to explain what waited for them at home. The date written on the research file was tomorrow, and someone had clearly expected Ethan to discover the truth. When the sedan finally passed through the Caldwell gates, the mansion looked exactly as it always had. Warm lights glowed behind tall windows. The gardens were perfectly arranged. Everything appeared calm. Ethan stepped through the front doors and immediately noticed Daniel Price standing near the main staircase. Daniel looked at him, then at Maya, and his expression changed for only a moment. Ethan saw it. He raised his hands and signed, "We need to talk." Daniel nodded. They entered the library. Maya remained nearby while Ethan placed the wooden case on the table. He opened it and removed the photograph. Daniel stared at it for several seconds. Then he closed his eyes. Ethan signed, "You knew." Daniel did not deny it. "Your mother asked me to protect the information," he signed. "I kept my promise." Ethan looked at him carefully. "For 18 years? Daniel nodded. "She believed you needed to grow up, without people deciding your future for you." Ethan glanced toward the silver device. "Then why did someone access the archive?" Daniel looked toward Maya. "Because not everyone respected her wishes." He explained that Elena had discovered that members of the family wanted to control the research for their own interests. She refused to let anyone turn Ethan's future into a business decision. So she moved the original research outside the family system and trusted only a few people to preserve it. Ruth Brooks was one of them. Dr. Morgan was another. Daniel had been the third. Ethan listened without interruption. Then he signed, "Why did you stay?" Daniel looked down. "Because your mother asked me to make sure you always had a choice." The room became still. Ethan looked at Maya. She had entered the Caldwell estate believing she was there to find one forgotten piece of her grandmother's past. Instead, she had helped return an entire part of Ethan's history to him. Ethan opened the wooden case again. The prototype was still there, carefully preserved. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he signed to Maya, "Will you help me understand it?" Maya smiled. "If you want me to." Ethan nodded.
Ido.
The next morning, they returned to the Research Center's Chicago office, where Dr. Morgan had arranged for the equipment to be tested safely. Ethan did not expect a miracle. Neither did Maya. He simply wanted the chance his mother had wanted for him when he was 7 years old. The device was adjusted carefully. Ethan placed his hand against the sensor and waited. A faint vibration passed through his fingers. He closed his eyes. For a moment, The world around him disappeared into complete stillness. Then he opened his eyes and looked at Maya. She sighed. "What do you feel?"
Ethan thought about the question.
His answer was simple. Possibility. Maya's eyes softened. Ethan looked down at the device, then at the photograph of his mother beside him. He could not hear her voice. He never had. But he finally understood the message she had left behind. She had never wanted to change who he was. She had wanted him to have the freedom to discover who he could become. Months later, the Caldwell estate felt different. Ethan still worked long hours. He still made difficult decisions. But the house was no longer built around silence. Maya remained part of his world, not because she was his maid, but because he trusted her. On a quiet evening, Ethan found the old recording device on the library table. He picked it up and smiled. Maya entered the room and signed. "Remember when I pulled that out?" Ethan nodded. Then he signed, "I thought it would change my life." Maya smiled. Ethan looked toward the window as snow began falling over Chicago. "It did," he signed. "Just not in the way I expected." And in that quiet room, the man who had spent his life believing silence was an empty space finally understood something his mother had known all along. Sometimes the greatest gift is not being given an answer, but being given the freedom to choose your own future.